What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 2 of Culture Shock. I'm Yongze, but you might also know me as Charles. I'm surprisingly the only Chinese host of this show for this season, despite the fact that we take up the majority of this school's international students' population. So as you guys know, this show is all about giving international students a platform to pretend to know all about this country. Shout out to my man Pablo for doing all the introduction in his episode, so I can spend more time talking about my deepest love and admiration for this country. Who doesn't love some good old America? The charming Uncle Sam, the land of the free and the home of the brave. This country is so great that even Jesus came by after his resurrection. Well, America is known for another thing, Hollywood. I was exposed to American TV shows and movies way before my arrival. I was already a Marvel fan, I used to religiously watch the Gravity Falls, and I was a huge fan of one of the biggest shows in the world, The Big Bang Theory. Okay, before you crucify me, Bazinga. Alright, now that's out of my system, I want to elaborate on why I love that show so much. It all goes back to the fall of 2015, the beginning of my complicated journey in the States. During my freshman year orientation, I was desperately trying to make new friends. A lot of other American kids already knew each other from middle school or sports clubs. Me, being the only Chinese international student in the crowd, felt nervous and left out. So I forced myself to approach others and try to start a conversation with the domestic students. So I was talking to myself, okay, I can talk to them about what's trending in the States, right? I mean, America declared cultural victory decades ago, so who isn't familiar with American pop culture? Geez, American cultural impact is so influential across the globe that there's a whole category of TV shows in China that is literally called American TV shows. So what's the last great American show I watched? Oh, wait, I got it. So I opened my mouth and asked, so do you guys watch The Big Bang Theory? And yeah, it was a mistake. The Americans started laughing, I was confused. But I thought this show was the biggest show in the States. I thought everyone liked to yell Bazinga when they trolled someone. The Americans stopped laughing and told me, hey buddy, people our age don't watch that kind of crap. Huh? But only the cool kids in China watch that show. Only the people who are intelligent enough to understand American humor and science jokes watch this universally beloved show. Have I been living a lie? This instant got me thinking, how come the same show is perceived dramatically different in those two countries? And how come many of the bottom-tier American shows are overwhelmingly beloved in the rest of the world? How come life in the States is not like how it is portrayed in American TV shows? Living here is nothing like Friends, where all 6 of them can afford to live in Manhattan, while half of them are constantly unemployed. Living here is nothing like The Big Bang Theory, where I get to meet a crazy nerd who learns how to speak Mandarin just because a local Chinese restaurant keeps messing their General Tao's chicken up. Well, maybe that's because I'm not crazy enough to get to encounter people like them. But if sitcoms are meant to reflect what real life is like in the States, then I was shocked when I first moved here after watching all those American TV shows. Smells like propaganda? The topic of propaganda is often as controversial as whether OJ did it or not. No? Everyone has an opinion. According to Merriam-Webster, propaganda is described as the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring an institution, or cause, or a person. So yes, your mother telling your aunt you're still single after every time you call home, that's counted as negative propaganda according to the dictionary. But that won't stop you, right, Mom? The history of propaganda is rich, especially in the United States. In April of 1917, Woodrow Wilson created the CPI, the Committee on Public Information, to create materials to promote the war efforts. The head of the CPI, George Creel, disliked the word propaganda and instead saw his work as advertising and promoting what was positive for Americans. You know the old saying, it's not propaganda if we're doing it. The CPI quickly turned sour and began creating visual posters of German soldiers drawing apes, carrying bloody weapons and harassing women, or as I like to call it, an NRA rally. Just kidding, the NRA has some somewhat decent-ish people, and we're not slandering them for legal concerns. Regardless, a World War later, Roosevelt created OWI, the Office of War Information, in 1942 to boost wartime production at home and undermine enemy morale overseas. OWI photographers documented aspects of homefront life and culture to promote a sentiment of American exceptionalism. For example, in regards to women workers and hide the cruelty of the time, such as violence against Asian American citizens. Decades later, the US government dropped billions of anti-communist leaflets over Vietnam in an effort to control the wartime narrative. But they did not have control over the American press, whose uncensored coverage of the war is credited with negatively swaying US public opinion on the conflict. Most people think propaganda has a specific aesthetic and that they'd be able to point at it as if they come across it in a free world. But just like an STD, propaganda can be hard to recognize until it's too late. As the definition states, propaganda is nothing more than the spread of ideas, and that is exceptionally easy to do in our modern world. Technology and globalization have given our generation the tools to share their thoughts and their lives with a click of a button. Now anyone can boil a cup of instant ramen, post on Instagram, and a stranger on the other side of the world could find it interesting. Nevertheless, technology has enabled propaganda to develop a more sinister side than cat videos and Trump memes. Philosopher Jean Baudrillard wrote in his book Simulacra and Simulation that the way we experience our world is not authentic. Everything we experience in our daily lives have been molded by institutions of ideology, like religion or the government, so that most acts and objects around us have a spider web of meaning associated with them. Systems of power, think of patriarchy or racism, use those institutions to insert meanings in acts and objects by deconstructing and reconstructing the values that identify them. Modern technology gives the system the power, the outreach to permeate our realities in a more direct and profound way. Now, for those who need a philosophy for dummies SparkNotes version of this information, people in power use technology to brainwash you into thinking what they want you to think when you see a specific object or do a specific thing. You see an Arby's ad, you feel sick, the new world order wins. And that's how it connects to propaganda. People in power now have better ways to push their agenda in ways that convert. They no longer need to use stereotypical traditional propaganda because they have our hyper-adulterated existence as a substitute, including movies and TV shows. So let's talk about how it appears in American media, more specifically Hollywood movies. Of course, when you go watch a movie at the cinema, you don't expect a 2-hour-long loop of someone yelling, "God bless America," and saying how it's the best country in the world. Well, fuck news for that. Instead, Hollywood and American media work in a subtler, but oftentimes way more effective way. They work through a concept known as soft power. I know I'm not talking about the superiority of soft-serve ice cream here. That would be a completely different episode. What I mean with soft power is the way that countries use stuff like culture and the market to influence other countries for their own particular interests. Instead of the typical "I have more tanks than you" approach that has been used throughout most of history, well, human history. So movies being manufactures of a particular culture, which in this case is American, can be used to proliferate American values and perspectives. In this way, Hollywood works as a sort of soft power agent along with anything that can be considered culture, which is pretty much everything, from the clothes you wear to the music you listen to. And keeping in mind that the biggest market for Hollywood movies is always overseas, filmmakers definitely think about stuff like this And that's where we get a typical plot where Superman has to save the world by keeping Martha safe in order for Zack Snyder to give us the deepest, most compelling plot twist ever.
Why did you say that name? Martha, why did you say that name?
Stop! Please, stop!
Why did you say that name?
It's his mother's name! It's his mother's name.
The world is actually some random cornfield in Kansas. But anyways, if American movies dominate the international movie market, with some exceptions like Bollywood in India, American filmmakers are free to say anything they want about their own country because, well, what other movies are you watching? They have the last word because of their soft power. So if they want to sugarcoat complex issues like race relations in a movie like Green Book, you bet they can. And worst of all, foreigners who have had no other exposure to this topic will believe them. Just as I was led to believe that the Big Bang Theory was the most popular thing in the US after Big Macs and guns, or Big Macs with guns. And it's not just about movies that talk about domestic issues. Just think about how other countries are portrayed in Hollywood, like the typical yellow tint in the Breaking Bad, as if the collection of sand and rocks known as New Mexico was somehow better. But you might be wondering, okay, big deal. Every American thinks that Mexico is some sort of other dimension where the sky's yellow and talks are soft-shelled. But it goes further than that. Take an example of the movie American Sniper, or Guys, I promise that we were the good guys in Iraq, the movie. Well, movies like American Sniper and almost every single war movie that you can think of really give both Americans and non-Americans a one-sided story of a historical event, making them think that the only perspective that matters and is truly accurate is their own. This is so prevalent in American media that there's even a name for it, American exceptionalism. Pair up this with the soft power of American culture internationally, and you have the perfect propaganda machine where everyone believes your side of the story and how you tell it. It's almost as if Dr. Evil was in charge of Hollywood. But maybe he isn't. So let's see what the average American has to say about this.
Hello again, this is Catalina Perez del Millan and I'm here on the Boston Public Garden on this average day to ask some questions. What do you think propaganda is?
Propaganda is using media to influence voters.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Propaganda.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's a very tough one. It depends on the definition. I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
It's an intention to influence your thinking.
And
Whether it
deceive
be
your
good or
thinking.
bad.
And maybe, well, see, I don't think it's always to
It's
deceive.
not always deceptive,
It's
but it could be.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
not
Yeah.
always, but it's an attempt to influence the way you think.
Propaganda is, using lies to influence people.
Propaganda is really taking information and twisting it a bit to try to drive home a point, and sometimes it's not always fully connected with the truth.
Propaganda? I think it's probably just kind of media that tries to heavily influence one way or another based on certain specific interest.
Do you think Hollywood is intentional propaganda?
Not really. I mean, I like Hollywood. Culture-wise, yeah.
I think some of it is, yes.
Yeah, I think there are biases.
In general?
Well, if they are, it doesn't work on me.
If it doesn't work.
Yeah. Having not been to a movie in
We're
the last
not
2
good-
years, I
We're
can
not
say
good
no.
questionnaire, sorry.
That's okay.
Say that again?
Do you think Hollywood is intentional propaganda?
No, I think Hollywood is entertainment and sometimes it's truth.
Do you watch The Big Bang Theory or have you ever watched it?
Sorry, which one?
The Big Bang Theory?
I've watched it, yes.
What do you think of people who watch it or who love it?
I think they like irreverent comedies.
I haven't watched them.
The Big Bang Theory, no. No? What do you think of people who watch it? We don't know because we don't know anyone who watches it.
Never watched that.
We're too old.
Big Bang Theory.
Do you watch The Big Bang Theory?
No, I don't.
No? What do you think of people who watch it?
Whatever rocks your boat.
Great. Ever seen The Big Bang Theory?
Big Bang Theory? The TV show? Yeah, I watch it.
Why do you watch it?
I mean, it's pretty fun. It's like it's pretty close to my life. I mean, it's about like 4 nerds playing around with science and how the lives goes. And yeah, it's pretty fun. And some jokes still make me laugh these days.
Those are some really interesting answers. Now back to you, Charles.
Alright, let's back up for a moment. You might be wondering, hold up Charles, so this is all part of an evil plan to take over the world through American propaganda? Well, not quite, because America is currently trying to take over America with propaganda at the moment. But there's other things to take more into account. Mainly that Hollywood is a business, not a propaganda machine working for the American government, or at least not since World War II. And that means that American exceptionalism, as much as we like to criticize it, sells both domestically and internationally. So now we have to ask ourselves, is this just another consequence of unbridled capitalism? Whoa, that was weird. Anyways, in China, action-packed blockbusters that are flopped in the US like Warcraft and almost every Transformers movie were a huge success. Even the world's highest grossing movie of all time, Avatar, had almost of its box office revenue in the international market, even if we all know that the title belongs to Avengers Endgame. So it seems like people around the world really enjoy stories about heroes fighting villains and blowing stuff up. But honestly, who doesn't? Humans have always been fantasized by stories of good triumphing against evil, all the way back to ancient Greece, when they weren't too busy doing massive orgies, of course. The good old time. The problem arises when all of the stories come from the same source, when there's only one perspective dominating every cinema around the world, one voice that communicates their own biases and furthers their own interest. And this is a problem, because it creates the illusion that there's only one side to the story. One side to the story, the white male American side, and it invalidates any other competing points of view. But the question still remains, is Hollywood international propaganda or not? Well, what all of this shows is that it isn't that simple. It never is. Many different factors are at play in determining what movies are being made or not, and which are being watched both domestically and internationally. It might be an evil plan for America to take over the world, or as it well might be a consequence of the capitalist market, or maybe it's just an honest mistake made by average Americans that are way too paranoid of repeating the PR mistake of the Vietnam War, so they want to see their country being portrayed as the literal paradise on earth. Well, it seems like there's no clear answer, so now what? I've been talking for like 15 minutes now, and somehow we claiming Sheldon Cooper wasn't cool is the most depressing part of this all. Because let's face it, nobody likes talking about this stuff. The Transformers movies are literally a military ad paid for by the US military, who enlisted the Pentagon to help rewrite the script. And I'm sure you just want to enjoy your car robots punching each other without feeling bad about it. I get it. I want to do the same. Robots punching robots to control an interdimensional cube is hard to relax. but things have actually started to change for the better. Still not great, but better. Kind of like how Transformers 4 was bad, but Bumblebee was slightly less bad. Baby steps, you know? The industry has started to focus on having more diverse directors, producers, and actors. More kinds of stories are not just being made, but are actually being watched. I don't need to remind anyone that the Korean movie Parasite won Best Picture. An Hui, the director from Hong Kong, has been featured on the front cover of Teller magazine, and Antoinette Jadotwan from the Philippines have begun getting recognized for her work on the Hulu show Alone Together. Though it's a slow start, it's a start. We're also seeing an Asian American renaissance begin to unfold in Hollywood. Roles for Asian actors aren't just offensive stereotypes of defaulted to the role of a doctor. Crazy Rich Asians was a massive hit, starring an all-Asian cast, and Marvel has finished filming Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It's the first movie featuring an Asian superhero lead. Still, only 1.4 out of 10 writers are people of color, and 1.4 out of 10 directors are people of color. But for the first time, people are noticing these things and talking about them, and this tree of fruitful opportunity is growing. The apples are people holding the Oscars accountable for not featuring diverse enough selections. The oranges are the fact that Asian Americans are directing profitable movies and slowly getting more roles. And the bananas are the fact that we're even talking about this now. And like the snake told Adam in Eden so long ago, the first step is to solving a problem is admitting you have one. Also, eat this fruit or something. I don't know. I think we pushed this metaphor a little bit too much. So anyway, jokes aside, we're actually witnessing an Asian representation renaissance in Hollywood right now. So many Asian American-centric movies have been made and released in the past few years. The last time moviegoers could see this many Asian faces on screen was when Fu Manchu threatened to destroy the great Western civilization with his sinister goatee. Positive Asian American representations in Hollywood has become more and more mainstream, which does bring a smile on my face. For instance, Lulu Wang's sophomore feature, The Farewell, was a critical and financial success. Almost the entirety of this American movie is in Mandarin and is set in China. The film recoined the term Asian American on screen by making people realize one thing: you can still be an American without giving up your ethnic identity. Sheldon is American, Michael Bay is an American, the protagonist in The Farewell is also American. Hollywood has the power to use media to help people reshape their conservative view of the definition of Americans. Honestly, I'm all for it. Does this mean that it still counts as propaganda? Well, if you're a two-time Trump voter and planning on voting for Tucker Carlson in 4 years, maybe. But personally, I absolutely cherish this phenomenon. Hopefully, the next generation of Asian international students can learn more about the reality of the United States of America by watching Hollywood movies about our stories, our traumas, and our culture that takes place in this country. Because at the end of the day, your high school life won't be as clueless as clueless. The parties you'll go to are nothing like the ones in Euphoria. This country is cruel. This country is inherently problematic. This country won't treat you like how they treated Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum in 22 Jump Street. So if you are someone who is planning on coming to the US to study and somehow watch this episode, buckle up. It's gonna be quite a ride. That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Yongze Wang, and this was Culture Shock. Tune in next time when we'll bring you another awesome host, another scandalous topic, for the same sparkling country. Bazinga.